What do you make of the structure of the job that they hired Michael to do, the president of not just the Wizards, but of Monumental Basketball, and how many other folks in the NBA are doing similar type of jobs?
I'm not sure that there are a lot of people who oversee both an NBA and a WNBA team. I'm going to be honest with you on this. I think that, I don't know that there's going to be a lot for Michael Winger to oversee with the Mystics. I mean, Mike Thibault is one of the all-time best people in the history of that league in terms of knowing the game, knowing the league, knowing the players. Don't think he needs a whole lot of help from Michael Winger on that. So, and that team is pretty ready-made to compete for a championship this year. So, while technically, yes, he will have to get budgets approved and stuff like that, I can't imagine that's going to be something that's going to cause a lot of angst between the two of them and the rest of the Mystics organization. So it's a title. I think you may have to give the guy a title to get him out of what was a very well-paying job with the Clippers and get him out from under Steve Ballmer, who obviously has quite a bit of resources. So you may have had to give him things that the Clippers couldn't offer. And obviously the Clippers don't have a WNBA team under their umbrella. The Sparks are under the Lakers umbrella. So, that I think that's just kind of a honorific. I think it's more about him being in charge of the Wizards.
Yeah, definitely. And as I said earlier in the show, if the Mystics win the next 3 WNBA titles and the Wizards are still winning 38 games, Michael Winger's not going to have a job anymore. That's just how this is. All due respect to what the Thibaults are doing with the Mystics, but that's kind of the point. Is like they've got that thing under control. It's just the Wizards just never do anything like everybody else, and I thought that was interesting. As for the guy they hired, though, it seems like he is a fantastic hire from everything I've heard so far. What do you know about Michael Winger and kind of what his role was in LA working with Lawrence Frank?
Well, the first thing is that he is a very smart guy by all accounts. Really, really creative in terms of putting together potential deals and negotiating contracts and things like that. But his background is not as a kind of basketball guy as I think most people would, kind of think of that title. He's not a guy that's going to be doing a ton of scouting. He looks at tape and things like that, so it's not like he has no knowledge about players and things like that. But his strength is not in terms of scouting or things like that GMs tend to be associated with. He is an analytics guy. He is a lawyer, with a lot of basketball knowledge, but that's his background. He's a big picture guy in terms of putting together organizational structure where everything kind of works together fairly harmoniously. The Clippers, again, are owned by Steve Ballmer. That is a big, big job to be working to trying to make Steve Ballmer's companies successful and making him happy. And I think Michael Winger did a good job with that, along with Lawrence Frank, of putting together a pretty good Clippers team. They have won a championship, and they were built to win a championship, but I think fairness dictates that you explain that, Kawhi Leonard's unavailability has been a big part of that. Paul George's unavailability has been a big part of why they haven't broken through. Their 2 superstar players have been injured a lot the last 4 years. You can't count on that, but everything else has run pretty well with the Clippers, and I think their hope is that, he can bring some of that structural competence to the Wizards while also working well with the basketball guy the way he worked with Lawrence Frank, who is the basketball kind of guy in the Clippers front office at the senior level. And they put a pretty good team around Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. So they're hoping that when Winger makes the hire here, he can have a similar kind of synergy with whoever he brings in to do the scouting, basketball kind of evaluation piece of it, and they can put a pretty good team together here.
David Aldridge, senior columnist from The Athletic with us, of course, Basketball Hall of Famer here on the Team 980. And yeah, David, like you said, like Lawrence Frank is a basketball guy. For those that don't know, former NBA coach and a pretty darn good one who makes the move into the front office. So it would make sense that now Winger is going to look for a general manager that is something like that in terms of being a basketball guy, not necessarily a former coach, but who knows? Where does that leave the list of candidates if you were to try to make an early list of either specific names, if you've heard anything, or the profile of who might be up for that job? And then how do they kind of split the power dynamics and the responsibilities between the two of them?
Look, I think you're certainly going to be looking at people that are in front offices right now. Maybe they don't have the title of general manager, but they certainly are involved in that space. You know, I'll just give you a name of a type of a guy I would like to think he would look at. A guy like Jeff Peterson, who's a local guy and, of course, went to the most successful high school in the history of the United States, the Math Catholic High School, and is the assistant GM of the Nets right now. And, you know, is a very, very an up-and-coming, very highly thought of young executive in the NBA that, you know, certainly has had successes and failures like everything else, and the Nets have been an interesting group, to say the least, the last few years. But Jeff Peterson is a guy that's been in that world of acquisition of superstar-level players, knows what that is like as an organization, the things that you have to do to make yourself appealing to superstars that want to play for you, but also has been part of a rebuild, you know, kind of rebuilding on the fly as they've had to do the last 6 months with the trades of Durant and with Kyrie, and kind of rebuilding the thing and trying to rebuild on the fly. And so he's got different experiences and skill sets. That's just one name. You know, Mark Eversley is a very smart guy as well, as currently in Chicago. Is working with Arturas Kanishevas, who's the boss there, and Mark is the GM, and they've had a good relationship there. And the Bulls, frankly, are kind of at a crossroads like the Wizards are with regard to their talent. But, you know, there are guys out there who could certainly step in and do that work along with Michael Winger. I don't know who Michael knows, so there's not like an obvious connection, but certainly he works at Oklahoma City for several years before he went to the Clippers. He's been with the Clippers for many years, certainly will have a knowledge about some of the young executives that are in that building as well. So we'll find. I think they're going to get this done fairly quickly. They have to, because the draft's coming up in about less than a month now, so they have to get going.
No doubt. What about some of the folks here? It was such an interesting front office because I do know like there's some pretty young, smart people that have been working in the Wizards front office, a lot of whom disagreed with a lot of the things that happened, the major decisions, let's call them, of what happened that perhaps were, or in some cases definitely were, ownership driven. So is there a possibility that there are some of the folks in-house that could stay or get elevated, or are we looking at a complete overhaul of this front office once the new person comes in? And, you know, what would you make of either direction?
I mean, obviously we don't know what Michael Winger is going to do. He hasn't gotten on the ground yet. So I don't know if he's going to say, I got to clean house and start over. Again, I kind of doubt, given the hour, you know, we're less than a month before a fairly important draft for this basketball team. So I can't imagine that you're going to come in and fire everybody that's been working on the draft for the Washington Wizards for the last 9 months, you know, plus getting ready and putting things out. I think you're just going to come in and get through this draft as quickly as you can, and then maybe spend the next year assessing the various people in the front office and the organization. The Wizards obviously kind of put some resources into analytics, more into analytics in the last few years. We know that Brett Greenberg is there, and they've hired some other people at fairly large amounts of money to kind of bolster their analytics a little bit. So they've got people in place to do that. I would imagine there would be some synergy there, but everybody has to work with people that they feel comfortable with, or that they know, or they feel good about. And so, the Wizards have very, very smart people in that space. Are they going to be part of a new regime, or are they going to be replaced? I can't say. But, Kathy Evans is pretty smart. I'll just put it that way. Kathy Evans is pretty smart. She's pretty good at this, at number crunching. So I would be surprised if they couldn't find a way for that to work together.
Right. And that's just, I think, the point to be made, right, is that just because this front office has done some incredibly mind-numbing things over the last couple of years doesn't mean that they all did it holding hands, hunky-dory, happy about it. There are voices of dissent. I would say they were typically pretty good about keeping that relatively in-house. But if you know the right people and who to talk to, there's certainly some folks over there that did just as much head-scratching as the rest of us around certain decisions that have been made over the last couple of years. As for the decisions that will be made moving forward, the biggest one is obviously Beal. What do you think those conversations are like, and what do you think ultimately the likelihood is that he's on the roster when they open training camp?
Well, again, Craig, these are things that it's hard for me to answer right now because haven't had a chance to talk to Michael Winger about what he thinks, what his philosophy is. Is it going to be sometimes a new person comes in and doesn't do anything the first year because they just want to see what they've got, or, and what's good and what's not good. I am guessing that certainly they will start to make moves toward getting their roster more in line financially with a team of their caliber. It doesn't make sense for them to be and over the cap. They're not paying the tax right now, but they're over the cap, and they're not near good enough to be over the cap. So I would certainly think they will start to make some of those decisions. Does that mean they don't re-sign Porzingis, they don't re-sign Kuzma, or they sign and trade him? It could. The Beal situation is its own thing because Brad has a no-trade clause. So it really doesn't matter what the Wizards want to do until Bradley Beal signs off on it. Now I would imagine when Winger comes in, he's going to have some sort of options, plans, whatever you want to call it, that he can present to Bradley Beal in terms of, hey, look, here's some things I'm thinking about doing in terms of if you want to waive your no trade, here's 3 or 4 places I think we could make a deal if you want to do that. Conversely, if Beal says, hey, I love it here, I don't want to leave here, then it's going to be more difficult because you're just not going to have the cap space that you would want. And I think you have to have that honest conversation with him. Like, honestly, if you stay here, chances are we're not going to win. We're not going to be very competitive. We're not going to be competitive enough at the top of the NBA. So you have to weigh that. And Brad's got, he's got the hammer in this situation. He decides how long he's going to be here. But if Brad says, hey, I don't want to go through a rebuild. I don't want to spend another 3 years of you tearing it down around me and then building it back up. I'd like to be traded. I think Michael Winger will have options available fairly quickly to make that happen.
So I'd love to ask you about those options because it's become my favorite question to ask national NBA folks and folks like yourself who are plugged in around the league. It's like, what is Brad's actual value on the market? I've had some people that say like they could trade him tomorrow, no problem. They'd probably get some stuff back for him, maybe not a lot, but they'd get something of value back. I've had other people say like, no, it's a negative value contract. They might have to attach a first-round pick to get rid of him. Where do you think the Bradley Beal trade value meter is, understanding the contract and also understanding that it's not a full market? There's not a full market of teams that he can go to. It's going to be a very limited number because of that no trade clause.
Yeah, no question. It is definitely not easy to trade a $50 million contract. I would say that no contract's untradeable. However, I've never heard of, I've been doing this a long time, Craig, and every 5 or 6 years somebody says there's no way they can trade that contract. And guess what? The contract gets traded. People get traded. I suspect, again, if Bradley Beal wants to be traded, they will get him traded somewhere. Now, what will the return be? It may not be what you would think for somebody that's been an all-star multiple times, and is viewed as a pretty good player, like a top 30 type player. I think most people would say Brad's one of the 30 best or so players in the league. Now, is he top 15? No, he's not. I don't think anybody would say he is. So, but I think they could get something for him. I would be surprised if they would be willing to attach a first round pick to a $50 million contract. I think they would say we're the ones that are, taking on bad contracts in return. We're not going to also give you a first round pick to do it, because they almost certainly would have to take multiple bad contracts back in order to make the numbers work. So I don't know if that's something. We'll see. But, so there could be trades. A lot will depend on how these playoffs shake out. A lot will depend on maybe where does Kyrie Irving wind up, because if he winds up in one place, that means he won't be in another place. And that team might be more inclined to make a move for somebody of Bradley's caliber. But there's a lot of moving parts. The draft certainly is going to be part of that as well. So I think if he wants to be traded, I think he'd be traded. I don't think that's going to be a problem.
David Aldridge, senior columnist at The Athletic. Last thing, David, you actually just touched on this. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into it. For this final question is, how have the playoffs influenced the market? Because, I thought going into the playoffs, Philly and Miami were two really interesting ones to watch. And sure they were, but they've gone in opposite ways of, I think, how all of us thought they were. Where Miami, a place that could have been a Bradley Beal trade target, now might look at it and go, I don't know, we're an NBA Finals team. We don't need Bradley Beal. Where Philly might go, man, we really need to switch something up. And obviously Joel and Brad are extremely tight, both true handling guys, et cetera, et cetera. Who knows what happens in Boston, depending on what happens tonight. How have these playoffs kind of shifted the trade market and what you think might happen kind of league-wide this summer, both specific and non-specific to Brad?
Well, look, certainly Philly is going to be kind of an up-in-the-air thing, depending on what they do with Harden. Do they have a deal with Harden ready to go, that they've negotiated already? If they do, that window closes. If they don't, the rumor, a lot of people have speculated that Harden wants to go back to Houston, play with the Rockets for whatever reason. Who knows why? If he decides to leave, then that certainly would make Philadelphia a possibility for a guy like Beal. They would certainly want to maximize Embiid's window of contention. He's right in the middle of his prime. I think we would all agree. So Philly would certainly be a case. Obviously, I think everybody who follows basketball knows that Jason Tatum and Brad are extremely tight, right? I mean, they are extremely close. And so if the Celtics go out before the finals, if they don't come back and they get beat in the conference final, I think that's certainly a place you could potentially look at as a team that might be looking to make an upgrade or do more, move things around to take another crack at it next year. What does Milwaukee do? They fired Mike Budenholzer. Clearly, that's a team in some level of flux. Is it a tweak with a player or two change, or is it a total rebuild? They've got a guy in Chris Middleton who is a well-regarded player, but Chris is getting up there in age, and he's got an option for $40 million next year. If he opts in, that may change what they want to do. So there are teams that could use Bradley Beal. So it's not like there's no teams out there that could use him. They could use him at $50 million if they think he can be a valuable second, maybe third option on a championship level team. I mean, he's not what people in Washington think of Bradley Beal is not what people around the league think of Bradley Beal. I'll just put it that way. Right. I think most people around the league think Bradley Beal's a pretty damn good player. And maybe he shouldn't be the best player on your team, but if he's your second or third best player, you're pretty good. So I think that we've seen it, Craig, in all of the coaching firings that we've seen, and the playoffs aren't even over yet. We've seen Doc Rivers fired because you didn't win. Monty Williams fired. Why? Because you didn't win. Budenholzer fired. Why? Because you didn't win. Nick Nurse fired. Why? Because you didn't win. And so that is certainly it's certainly the pressure to win is getting worse in this league. It's not getting better. So teams are going to be increasingly desperate to do things to build championship level teams. And from that standpoint, that's why I don't think if there are teams, it only takes one that thinks, hey, Bradley Beal could help us in a different role with different responsibilities in a different organization, he can get traded this summer. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. David Aldridge, senior columnist at The Athletic, Basketball Hall of Famer. Always appreciate your time, sir. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend.
Okay, Craig, my pleasure, sir.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.